Our story begins not with heroes or villains, but with a planet dying in silence. In a world where energy itself has become a commodity to be harvested and sold, where corporations have grown more powerful than nations, and where the very lifeblood of the world is being drained to fuel the endless appetite of progress, something ancient and terrible stirs in the darkness. This is the world of Final Fantasy VII, a place where the boundary between life and death blurs into something called the life stream, where memory and identity can fracture and reform, and where a flower girl selling blossoms in the slums might hold the fate of everything in her gentle hands. The city of Midgar rises from the wasteland like a monument to human ambition and human arrogance in equal measure. It is a city built in layers, divided not by neighborhoods or districts, but by elevation itself, creating a stark geography of inequality that defines every aspect of life within its borders. The upper plate, suspended hundreds of feet above the ground on massive support pillars, is home to the wealthy and powerful, bathed in perpetual sunlight and constructed from gleaming steel and glass that reflects the sky. Here, the executives of the Shinra Electric Power Company live in luxury, conducting their business from towering offices that seem to scrape the heavens themselves, making decisions that affect millions without ever having to see the consequences of those choices. Below the plate lies a different world entirely. The slums exist in perpetual twilight, never feeling true sunlight on their faces, living beneath the enormous metal ceiling that blocks out the sky. Down here, in the rust and shadows, life is cheap and hope even cheaper. Makeshift buildings constructed from salvaged materials lean against each other for support, creating a warren of narrow streets and cramped living spaces where people make do with whatever they can scavenge or steal. The air tastes of metal and chemical runoff, thick with pollution that never quite dissipates in the absence of wind and weather. Water drips constantly from the plate above, carrying with it the waste and refuse of the upper world, a constant reminder that those below exist only to support those above, their suffering invisible to the comfortable citizens enjoying the sunlight. Yet even in this place of poverty and desperation, life persists. Communities form in the darkness, bonds of friendship and family that shine all the brighter for the shadows that surround them. In Sector 7, one of 8 sections that make up Midgar's underworld, there exists a bar called Seventh Heaven, owned and operated by a young woman named Tifa Lockhart. She is striking in appearance, with dark hair and red eyes that seem to hold both warmth and sadness in equal measure, her physical strength evident in the way she moves, the product of years of martial arts training that began in childhood. The bar serves as a gathering place for the neighborhood, a rare spot of comfort and community in the harsh environment of the slums, where people can share drinks and stories and pretend, for a few hours, that the weight of the world above their heads does not press quite so heavily. But Seventh Heaven is more than just a bar. In its basement, hidden from casual observation, lies the headquarters of a resistance group called Avalanche. They are labeled terrorists by Shinra and the media the corporation controls, branded as dangerous radicals who threaten the stability and prosperity of society. To themselves and their supporters, they are freedom fighters, environmental activists willing to risk everything to stop Shinra from literally draining the planet to death. The organization is led by a man named Barrett Wallace, a towering figure whose right arm has been replaced with a gun prosthetic, the result of an accident that destroyed his hometown and took his arm in the process. He speaks with the passion of someone who has lost everything and now fights with nothing left to lose, his voice echoing with anger at the injustice of a world where profit matters more than survival. Barrett's fury is personal as well as political. He comes from Corel, a mining town that once cooperated with Shinra, allowed them to build a Mako reactor near their community with promises of prosperity and progress. Instead, the reactor brought only destruction. When accidents occurred, and accidents always occur, when dealing with the immense energies Shinra manipulates, the corporation burned the entire town to the ground rather than accept responsibility, eliminating any witnesses who might testify against them. Barrett's hometown vanished in an inferno of corporate liability management, his neighbors and friends murdered to protect Shinra's public image. He carries that loss like a physical weight, channeling his grief into determination that what happened to Coral will never happen again, that Shinra's reign of environmental destruction will end, even if he has to tear down every Mako reactor with his bare hands. Avalanche's mission is both simple and impossibly dangerous. Scattered around Midgar are 8 Mako reactors, massive facilities that draw energy directly from the planet's lifestream, converting the very essence of life itself into electrical power that fuels the city above. Each reactor represents a wound in the world, a point where Shinra literally drains the soul of the planet to keep lights burning and machines running. Avalanche intends to destroy these reactors one by one, disrupting Shinra's power supply and forcing the world to confront the cost of their comfortable lives. It is a desperate plan born of desperation, and they know their chances of success are minimal. Shinra has armies, resources, and the backing of governments and populations who have grown dependent on the energy the corporation provides. Avalanche has passion and conviction, and very little else, which is why they have hired a mercenary. Cloud Strife arrives in Sector 7 on a train filled with workers heading home after their shifts, looking distinctly out of place among the tired laborers with his spiked blonde hair that seems to defy gravity, his cold blue eyes that glow with an unnatural light, and the enormous sword strapped to his back, a blade nearly as tall as he is and seemingly far too massive for anyone to wield effectively. He carries himself with the confidence of a trained soldier, his movements precise and economical, betraying combat experience that sets him apart from the desperate amateurs who make up most of Avalanche's membership. Cloud claims to be a former member of Soldier, Shinra's elite military unit, enhanced with Mako energy and genetic augmentation to create super soldiers capable of incredible feats of strength and combat prowess. His relationship with Barrett is contentious from the first moment. Cloud makes it clear he has no interest in Avalanche's cause, no burning desire to save the planet or fight corporate oppression. He is here for one reason only, because Tifa asked him to be here, and she is paying him well for his services. This mercenary attitude grates on Barrett, who sees in Cloud everything he despises about people who have given up on making the world better, who have decided that personal survival and profit are the only things that matter. They snipe at each other constantly, Cloud's cold pragmatism clashing with Barrett's passionate idealism, creating tension that threatens to undermine the mission before it even begins. The operation proceeds nonetheless. Under cover of darkness, Avalanche infiltrates Sector 1's Mako reactor, fighting past Shinra's security forces with a combination of Cloud's superior combat skills and the determination of Barrett and his team. The reactor's interior is a cathedral of pipes and machinery, all of it humming with barely contained power. The air itself seeming to vibrate with the energy being processed and distributed. Blue-green Mako energy flows through transparent tubes, beautiful and terrible. The visible manifestation of the planet's essence being converted into fuel. The facility feels almost alive, like they have entered the belly of some immense mechanical beast. And the deeper they penetrate toward the core, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes. Cloud places the bomb, his hands steady despite the danger, the training of his claimed soldier background evident in his calm efficiency. The explosive is set on a timer, giving them precious minutes to escape before the reactor tears itself apart. But as Cloud arms the device, something strange happens. He hears a voice, feminine and urgent, warning him to be careful, to get out before it is too late. The voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating not in his ears but directly in his mind, accompanied by a flash of images he does not understand, places and faces that mean nothing to his conscious memory but trigger something deeper. A sense of recognition he cannot quite grasp. The moment passes quickly, leaving him disoriented and uncertain. But there is no time to puzzle over mysteries with a timer counting down and guards closing in on their position. The escape is chaotic. Alarms blare through the facility as Shinra's security realizes the infiltration. Automated defenses activating alongside human guards, scrambling to intercept the intruders. Avalanche fights their way back through corridors they cleared only minutes before, now flooded with opposition, the sounds of gunfire and combat echoing off metal walls. They burst out of the reactor just as the timer reaches zero, the explosion blooming behind them in a flower of fire and destruction, the entire structure shuddering and then collapsing as the bomb tears through its support systems. The mission is a success, the reactor destroyed. An avalanche has struck their first blow against Shinra's infrastructure. But as Cloud separates from the group in the chaos of the escape, making his way through unfamiliar streets of the Sector 8 slums, he encounters something unexpected. A young woman in a pink dress is selling flowers on a street corner, an impossibility in itself, because nothing grows in the sunless world beneath the plate. She has long brown hair woven with a pink ribbon, green eyes that seem to look through him rather than at him, and a presence that feels somehow out of place in the grime and despair of the slums, like she carries her own light that the darkness cannot quite touch. Their eyes meet across the street, and for a moment everything else falls away, the sounds of pursuit and panic fading into background noise. She approaches him directly, offering a flower with a smile that seems genuine despite everything surrounding them. Cloud, unused to such straightforward kindness and still riding the adrenaline of combat and escape, finds himself buying the flower without quite understanding why, exchanging gil for a yellow bloom that represents something precious in this place where beauty is rare. The transaction lasts only moments before the sounds of Shinra soldiers grow louder, forcing Cloud to move, to disappear into the maze of the slums before he can be caught and connected to the reactor bombing. But the image of the flower girl lingers in his mind, another mystery added to the collection of things he does not fully understand about this strange night. The flower girl's name is Aerith Gainsborough, though Cloud does not learn this yet. She lives in the Sector 5 slums with her adoptive mother Elmira, tending a small garden in an abandoned church where a hole in the plate above allows sunlight to reach the ground, creating the only place in all of Midgar where flowers can grow naturally. Aerith has spent her entire life under the surveillance of Shinra, though she has only recently become aware of the full extent of their interest in her. She is special in ways she does not fully comprehend, the last living member of an ancient race called the Cetra, people who could communicate directly with the planet itself, who understood the flow of life and energy in ways that modern humans have forgotten. Shinra knows what Aerith is, or at least they know enough to want her in their custody, to study and exploit whatever makes her different from ordinary humans. The company employs a special operations group called the Turks to monitor her movements and periodically attempt to bring her in for testing, efforts that Aerith has so far managed to evade through a combination of luck, cleverness, and the protection of friends in the slums, who help hide her when Shinra's agents come looking. But the game of cat and mouse has been going on for years, and both sides know it cannot continue forever. Eventually, Shinra's resources will overwhelm Aerith's ability to stay hidden, and when that happens, she will disappear into the corporation's research facilities, becoming one more test subject in their endless quest for power and profit. Back at Seventh Heaven, Avalanche celebrates their successful strike, though the celebration is muted by the knowledge of how much work remains. 1 reactor destroyed out of 8, and already the news broadcasts are spinning the event, calling it an unprovoked terrorist attack that killed innocent workers and threatens the stability of power supply to millions of residents. Shinra's propaganda machine moves quickly, shaping the narrative before any competing version of events can take hold, ensuring that public opinion turns against Avalanche rather than questioning why anyone would be desperate enough to resort to bombing reactors in the first place. Barrett rages at the screen, but he knows they are fighting a war on multiple fronts, and the battle for hearts and minds may be even more difficult than the physical conflict. Cloud tries to leave after collecting his payment, his mercenary ethics requiring nothing more once the job is complete. But Tifa stops him, not with force, but with personal appeal, reminding him of promises made years ago, leveraging their shared history and his apparent inability to refuse her requests. She convinces him to stay for one more job, another reactor bombing scheduled for the next day, appealing to whatever loyalty or connection exists beneath his cold exterior. Cloud agrees, though whether from genuine care for Tifa, financial pragmatism, or simply the path of least resistance remains unclear even to himself. He has built walls around whatever he truly feels, constructed a persona of detachment and professional distance that makes it easier to navigate a world that has disappointed him too many times. That night, Cloud dreams. The dreams are fragmented and disturbing, images that do not connect into coherent narrative, but leave him feeling displaced and anxious. He sees fire consuming a town, screams echoing through smoke-filled streets. He sees a man with long silver hair and cold eyes, someone who should be familiar, but whose face triggers a cascade of conflicting emotions, respect and hatred intertwined, until he cannot separate one from the other. He sees himself as a child, alone on a mountain at night, and then the images scatter and reform into something else entirely, memories or hallucinations, or something in between, his mind clearly struggling with information it cannot properly process. He wakes in the small room Tifa has provided, disoriented and uncertain, the dreams fading but leaving behind a residue of unease that colors everything that follows. The second mission proceeds similarly to the first. Avalanche infiltrates the Sector 5 reactor, fights through security, plants the bomb, and prepares to escape. But this time, Shinra is ready. President Shinra himself has been monitoring the situation, and he has no intention of allowing terrorists to continue destroying his infrastructure without consequence. The corporation springs a trap, sealing exits and flooding the reactor with elite troops and mechanized security, turning the facility into a kill zone designed to eliminate Avalanche once and for all. The fighting is desperate and brutal, Avalanche barely holding their own against overwhelming opposition, and for a moment it seems certain they will all die here. Another footnote in Shinra's ongoing consolidation of power. They escape only through a combination of Cloud's superior combat abilities, Barrett's determination, and sheer luck that manifests as unexpected structural failures that open alternate routes of egress. But the escape is anything but clean. Cloud becomes separated from the others in the chaos, falling through a weakened section of walkway and plummeting through open air with nothing to arrest his descent. He should die from the fall, his body smashed against the hard ground of the slums, but instead he crashes through the roof of an abandoned church, his momentum broken by the wooden ceiling before he continues downward to land in a bed of flowers that cushion the final impact, leaving him battered and disoriented but alive. He wakes to find Aerith standing over him, the same flower girl from the night before, concern evident in her expression as she checks to make sure he is not seriously injured. Cloud is alive through sheer improbability, having survived a fall that should have killed him, landing in the one place in all of Sector 5 where the ground is soft enough to save him from the consequences of his plummet. Aerith explains that this church is her special place, where she tends the flowers that grow nowhere else in Midgar, where she comes to feel connected to something larger than the misery and poverty surrounding them. The flowers are important to her in ways that Cloud does not yet understand, symbols of life persisting against all attempts to crush it, reminders that beauty can exist even in places designed to eliminate it. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the Turks, Shinra operatives who have been tracking Aerith and now see an opportunity to capture her while she is occupied with the stranger who crashed through her church roof. Reno, the leader of this particular Turk unit, is casual and almost playful in his approach, treating the abduction like a game rather than a serious operation, his attitude masking the lethal efficiency that has made him one of Shinra's most effective agents. He makes it clear that Aerith is coming with them, that resistance is futile and will only make the situation more complicated for everyone involved. Aerith, with the boldness of someone who has been running from Shinra her entire life and refuses to simply surrender now, makes Cloud an offer. One date, a single night of his time, in exchange for his help escaping the Turks and seeing her safely home. She frames it playfully, but there is genuine desperation underneath the light tone, a recognition that she cannot evade Shinra alone this time, that she needs help from someone skilled enough to fight their way out of this situation. Cloud hesitates, his instinct to avoid complications warring with something else, a pull he does not fully understand, that makes it difficult to simply walk away and leave Aerith to her fate. He accepts, and what follows is a running battle through the church, across the rooftops of Sector 5, through construction sites and back alleys as Cloud and Aerith stay just ahead of Reno and his forces. The Turk proves to be more than just talk, his electrified rod crackling with energy as he presses the attack, forcing Cloud to fight defensively while simultaneously protecting Aerith from the crossfire. They escape only by improvising, using the environment against their pursuers, causing structural collapses and exploiting the chaotic geography of the slums to create barriers and delays that allow them to reach safety, emerging finally at Aerith's house in a different section of Sector 5, exhausted but alive. Elmira, Aerith's adoptive mother, welcomes them warily, her experience with Shinra making her suspicious of anyone who arrives with her daughter, especially someone who carries a sword and has the glowing eyes of Mako exposure. But Aerith vouches for Cloud, insists that he saved her from the Turks, and Elmira relents, offering them food and a place to rest, while Shinra hopefully loses their trail in the warren of the slums. Over dinner, Elmira tells Cloud about Aerith's history, about finding her and her birth mother years ago, about the Turks' constant surveillance and periodic attempts at abduction, about living under the shadow of corporate interest that treats people as resources rather than individuals deserving of autonomy and respect. Cloud learns that Aerith's birth mother, Ifalna, was also a Cetra, and that she died while escaping from Shinra with young Aerith, sacrificing herself to ensure her daughter made it to safety. The story explains much about Aerith's situation, about why Shinra pursues her so relentlessly, about the value they place on someone who carries the genetic legacy of the ancients. Elmira makes Cloud promise, or tries to make him promise, to leave Aerith alone, to slip away during the night and let her daughter return to her normal life of hiding and evasion, rather than dragging her into whatever conflict surrounds a man who fights Shinra directly and carries destruction in his wake. But Cloud cannot make that promise. Or rather, events overtake his ability to choose. In the middle of the night, he wakes to find Aerith already awake and preparing to leave, having heard news from contacts in the slums that Tifa has been taken by Don Corneo, a crime boss who rules Sector 6 through a combination of violence, bribery, and the fear that comes from being unpredictable and cruel. Tifa apparently sought information from Corneo about Shinra's plans, attempting to learn whether the corporation knows Avalanche's identities and location, and walked into a trap that delivered her directly into the hands of someone who treats women as property and punishment as entertainment. Aerith intends to rescue her friend, or Cloud's friend. The details of their relationships unclear, but the urgency absolute. Cloud cannot let Aerith walk into danger alone. Not after everything that has happened. Not after she hired him as her bodyguard, even if she framed it as a date. They formulate a desperate plan born of limited options and time constraints. Don Corneo selects women from the local population to serve as his brides, a euphemism for prisoners kept for his pleasure and discarded when he grows bored. And he is currently selecting his next bride from a group of candidates. Aerith will volunteer, attempt to be chosen so she can infiltrate Corneo's mansion and locate Tifa before anything irreversible happens. The plan has obvious problems, not least of which is that it relies entirely on Corneo actually selecting Aerith from however many candidates present themselves. But when Cloud points this out, Aerith reveals her solution, a modification to the plan so absurd that it might actually work precisely because no one would expect it. Cloud will also volunteer, disguised as a woman, increasing the chances that one of them will be selected and ensuring that whichever one gains access to the mansion will have backup. Cloud's protests are immediate and vehement, but Aerith is insistent, and eventually he recognizes that however ridiculous the plan might be, it offers their best chance of reaching Tifa before Corneo or his men harm her. What follows is a sequence that would be comedic if the underlying situation were not so desperate. With Aerith's help and coaching, Cloud is transformed into an approximation of a woman, complete with dress, makeup, and a wig that does remarkably little to disguise his clearly masculine features. The result is absurd, and Cloud spends the entire experience in obvious discomfort, his dignity sacrificed on the altar of necessity. But absurdly, impossibly, the plan works. Don Corneo, whether due to poor eyesight, stranger preferences than anyone anticipated, or simply the whims of fate, selects Cloud along with Tifa and Aerith as his 3 finalists, guaranteeing that all 3 of them gain access to his mansion and can coordinate their escape. Inside Corneo's gaudy palace of crime, they discover more than just Tifa being held prisoner. They overhear conversations between Corneo and Shinra representatives, learn of a plan so audacious and terrible that it defies belief even knowing Shinra's history of atrocities. The corporation intends to drop the Sector 7 plate, the massive metal structure that separates the slums from the upper city, crushing everything and everyone below in order to eliminate Avalanche and demonstrate the consequences of opposing Shinra's authority. Thousands of innocent people will die, an entire section of Midgar erased, families and communities obliterated, all to send a message that resistance will not be tolerated under any circumstances. The three of them fight their way out of Corneo's mansion, no longer caring about subtlety or stealth in their desperation to reach Sector 7 before Shinra can execute their murderous plan. They race through the slums as fast as their bodies will carry them, using every shortcut and back route they know. But Midgar is vast, and the sectors are separated by significant distances. By the time they arrive at Sector 7, Shinra's forces are already in position, securing the pillar that supports the plate, preparing the explosives that will sever the connections and send tons of metal crashing down onto the helpless population below. Barrett and the rest of Avalanche are already there, fighting desperately to stop the demolition, but they are vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Shinra has deployed not just regular security forces, but elite troops under the command of the Turks, professionals who execute their orders without hesitation or mercy. The battle at the pillar is chaos, gunfire and explosions echoing through the support structure as both sides fight for control of the charges that will determine the fate of thousands of lives. Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith join the fight immediately, adding their strength to Avalanche's desperate defense. But even their intervention is not enough to turn the tide. They fight their way up the pillar, ascending through the scaffolding and platforms that provide access to the plate's underside, battling Shinra forces every step of the way. At the top, they confront Reno again, the Turk positioned to ensure the demolition proceeds regardless of Avalanche's interference. The fight with Reno is brutal, his combat skills and Mako enhancements making him a formidable opponent even against Cloud's superior abilities. But eventually, they overcome him, leaving the Turk injured and out of the fight, and for a moment, it seems like they might actually prevent the catastrophe. Then, the bombs detonate anyway. Not all of them. The battle has disrupted Shinra's careful planning, but enough. Enough to weaken the pillar's structural integrity beyond the point of recovery. The massive support column shudders and begins to fail, metal groaning and tearing as stress fractures race through the structure. They have seconds, maybe less, to escape before the entire assembly collapses and takes them with it. Barrett stays to try one final attempt at disabling the remaining charges, but it is too late. There is nothing more that can be done. The pillar falls. The plate above, deprived of support, tilts and then drops, accelerating toward the ground with inexorable force. The sound is beyond description, a roar of rending metal and pulverized concrete that drowns out everything else, creating a wind that throws debris and bodies through the air like leaves in a hurricane. Cloud and the others ride the chaos down, clinging to pieces of wreckage as they plummet, somehow surviving the fall through a combination of luck and the Mako enhancements that make their bodies far more resilient than normal humans. When the dust settles, Sector 7 is gone. Where there was once a vibrant community of thousands of people living in poverty but living nonetheless, there is now only rubble and ruins, crushed beneath megatons of metal that obliterated everything in an instant. The few survivors, those who were elsewhere when the plate dropped, wander through the wreckage in shock, searching for loved ones they know they will never find. calling out names that receive no answer. The death toll is staggering, an atrocity on a scale that defies comprehension, and Shinra's propaganda machine is already spinning the story, blaming Avalanche for the disaster, claiming the terrorists miscalculated their own bombing and caused the very catastrophe they supposedly sought to prevent. Barrett is devastated, his friends and comrades dead, his headquarters destroyed, his adopted daughter Marlene missing in the chaos. They eventually learn that Marlene is safe, spirited away to Aerith's house before the collapse by a Good Samaritan. But the knowledge does little to ease the guilt and horror of survival when so many others did not. Avalanche as an organization is effectively destroyed, its members scattered or dead, its mission seemingly ended in the most brutal way possible. But surrender is not an option, not after what Shinra has done, not while the corporation continues to drain the planet and murder anyone who opposes them. Aerith is gone. In the confusion of the collapse and its aftermath, Shinra's forces captured her, finally succeeding in their long campaign to bring her into custody. The corporation wasted no time, moving her immediately to their headquarters in the upper plate, locking her away in their research laboratories, where scientists can study the last living Ketra without interference or the possibility of escape. For Cloud and the others, Aerith's capture transforms their mission from one of environmental activism to something more personal. They will infiltrate Shinra headquarters itself, the most secure facility in Midgar, and rescue Aerith from whatever experiments and exploitation await her in the corporation's research division. The plan is suicidal. Shinra's headquarters is a 70-story tower of glass and steel in the heart of the upper plate, guarded by thousands of security personnel and every technological defense system the richest corporation on the planet can devise. Breaking in would be difficult enough. Breaking in and then escaping with a prisoner would require miracles upon miracles. But they have no choice, or rather, they have made their choice, decided that leaving Aerith to suffer at Shinra's hands is not acceptable, regardless of the risks involved in mounting a rescue. They infiltrate the building by the most audacious route imaginable, ascending the exterior of the tower in broad daylight, climbing stairs and service platforms while avoiding security cameras and guard patrols. The ascent takes hours, each floor presenting new obstacles and dangers, the tension mounting as they climb higher and exposure becomes more likely. But somehow they make it, reaching the upper floors where Shinra's executive offices and research laboratories are located, the inner sanctum where the corporation's darkest secrets are housed and its most questionable experiments conducted. The laboratories are a horror show of scientific ethics discarded in favor of results. They find test subjects in containment tanks, creatures that might once have been human or animal, but have been transformed into something else by exposure to Mako and genetic manipulation. They find evidence of experiments on the Cetra, documentation of Professor Hojo's attempts to breed Aerith with various candidates to produce offspring with ancient abilities, proposals that treat her as livestock rather than a person. The casual cruelty documented in sterile scientific language is in some ways more disturbing than the physical evidence of suffering, revealing a mindset that sees people as resources to be exploited without consideration for consent or dignity. They find Aerith in a containment chamber, suspended in a tank of Mako energy, sensors and tubes connected to her body, as machines monitor and record every aspect of her physiology. She is alive but unconscious, sedated to prevent interference with whatever tests are being conducted. Cloud smashes the containment system without hesitation, pulling Aerith free from the machinery and carrying her to safety, while alarms blare throughout the facility. Their presence has been detected. The entire building now on alert. Every guard and security system mobilizing to intercept and eliminate the intruders. But they are not alone in their infiltration. They encounter Red 13, a creature that appears to be a combination of lion and wolf with red fur and a blazing tail. Intelligent and capable of speech, despite his non-human appearance. Red 13 has been held captive by Professor Hojo, subjected to experiments meant to study his unique biology and possibly breed him with Aerith as part of the professor's obsessive attempts to create hybrid ancient offspring. The creature is wary but desperate, recognizing in Cloud's group his best chance of escape, and he joins their escape attempt without hesitation, adding his considerable physical capabilities to their fighting strength. Their route through Shinra headquarters takes them past secrets they were never meant to discover. They learn about soldier programs' true nature, about how elite operatives are created through exposure to Mako energy and injection with cells from something called Genova, procedures that enhance physical abilities, but also alter the mind in ways that are not fully understood or carefully controlled. They find references to failed experiments and subjects who did not survive the enhancement process. Casualties in Shinra's pursuit of creating super soldiers who can enforce their will against any opposition. They learn about Genova itself, an entity stored in a holding tank in one of the research laboratories. Its appearance both humanoid and distinctly alien, its body covered in strange growths and possessing features that should not exist in any natural creature. The documentation refers to it as a calamity from the skies, something that fell to the planet 2,000 years ago and nearly destroyed the Cetra civilization before being sealed away. Professor Gast, a Shinra scientist who predated Hojo's tenure, discovered Genova's frozen remains in an excavation at the northern continent and mistakenly identified it as a member of the Cetra race. This fundamental error in identification became the foundation for all subsequent research, for the Genova project that produced soldier operatives and shaped the course of the entire world. As they attempt to escape through Shinra's executive offices, they encounter President Shinra himself, the man whose corporate vision has shaped the modern world and whose decisions have led to environmental devastation on a planetary scale. He is exactly what one would expect, arrogant and dismissive, treating their infiltration as a minor inconvenience rather than a genuine threat, confident that his security forces will recapture them long before they can escape the building. He taunts them with his power, with the knowledge that Shinra controls everything that matters, that governments and nations dance to his tune, because they are dependent on the Mako energy his corporation provides. He is untouchable, or believes himself to be, protected by money and influence, and the simple fact that the world needs what he sells. The building's security systems lock down around them, sealing doors and activating defense measures meant to contain the intruders until armed forces can arrive to eliminate them. They are trapped, caught between executive offices and laboratories with no apparent route of escape. Guards closing in from multiple directions and automatic weapons deploying from concealed positions. President Shinra watches from his office, observing the situation through security cameras, already preparing the press release that will blame Avalanche for the damage and casualties that will result from their inevitable defeat. But then something changes. The power fluctuates, lights dimming and then surging, and when they stabilize, everything has shifted in subtle ways that are difficult to identify immediately. President Shinra's confident expression falters, his attention drawn to something outside his window, something that has alarmed him in a way that their presence never did. The security systems disengage, doors unlocking and automated defenses powering down, as if the building itself has decided to release its grip. The guards that were converging on their position fail to arrive, the sounds of combat and confusion echoing from elsewhere in the building. They take the opportunity to escape, fleeing through now accessible corridors toward the building's lower levels and potential exit points. But something feels wrong, the quality of the silence disturbed rather than peaceful, the absence of pursuit more ominous than the previous containment. When they reach President Shinra's office, they find him dead, his body slumped in his chair with Sephiroth's distinctive Masamune blade driven through his torso and into the seat beneath him. The scene is arranged almost artistically, the murder positioned to be discovered, meant to send a message rather than simply eliminate a target. Sephiroth. The name triggers cascades of reaction in Cloud, memories and emotions surfacing in confused fragments. Sephiroth was Soldier's greatest operative, a legendary figure whose combat prowess became the stuff of myth, inspiring countless young men to join the program in hopes of achieving even a fraction of his abilities. Cloud himself claimed to have served with Sephiroth, referenced shared missions and battles, but the memories are unstable, refusing to cohere into consistent narrative when examined closely. And more importantly, Sephiroth is supposed to be dead, killed 5 years ago in an incident that remains classified and shrouded in official denials and conflicting reports. Yet here is evidence of his presence. His distinctive blade used in a murder that required infiltrating the most secure building in Midgar and bypassing security measures that should have made such an action impossible. The implications are staggering, suggesting that either Sephiroth never died, or that something wearing his face and wielding his weapon has emerged from whatever grave should have held him. Cloud stares at the scene, his mind refusing to process what his eyes are seeing, memories surfacing and submerging like debris in troubled water, never quite breaking through to consciousness, but disturbing everything beneath the surface. They find a trail leading from President Shinra's office, a literal trail of blood and something else, a dark substance that seems to writhe and move of its own accord when light hits it at certain angles. The path leads upward through the building rather than down, taking them toward the roof and whatever awaits there. They follow because there is no other choice, because understanding what happened here matters as much as escape, because Sephiroth's presence transforms everything they thought they knew about their situation. If he is alive, if he has returned from whatever death or disappearance claimed him 5 years ago, then the stakes of their struggle have escalated beyond anything they imagined. When this journey began with simple reactor bombings, the trail leads to Genova's chamber, and they arrive to find the containment tank shattered, the mysterious entity gone, only traces of that same dark substance remaining to show where it once rested. The chamber feels violated, not just physically breached, but desecrated in some way that goes beyond simple theft. Whatever Genova was, whatever purpose it served in Shinra's experiments, it is now free and apparently reunited with Sephiroth. Two terrible forces combined in ways that no one can predict or prepare for. The implications multiply faster than they can process them. Questions without answers piling up until thinking about any of it becomes overwhelming. They escape Shinra headquarters through a combination of chaos and good fortune, the building in complete disarray following President Shinra's murder and Genova's disappearance, guards and security systems focused on internal threats rather than preventing their departure. They take a vehicle from Shinra's motor pool, a sleek motorcycle that Cloud handles with unexpected expertise, and race through Midgar's upper plate toward the city's outskirts and the wastelands beyond. Behind them, alarms continue to sound, And somewhere in the corporate hierarchy, decisions are being made about how to respond to this catastrophic breach of security. But for now, they are free, escaped from the city that has been their entire world. The group that emerges from Midgar is fundamentally different from the one that entered Shinra headquarters. They are fugitives now, wanted by the corporation, and hunted by forces that will not stop pursuing them until they are captured or killed. Avalanche as a resistance organization is effectively destroyed, its infrastructure obliterated along with Sector 7, its surviving members scattered or in hiding. But what they have gained is something perhaps more valuable than organizational structure: purpose beyond simple destruction. A mission that extends beyond bombing reactors and disrupting Shinra's operations. Sephiroth is alive and active, pursuing some agenda that involves Jenova, and likely threatens far more than just Shinra's corporate interests. President Shinra's murder will reshape the political landscape, his son Rufus inheriting control of the corporation, and likely taking it in new and potentially more dangerous directions. And Cloud's fragmentary memories and unstable sense of identity suggest mysteries about his own past that need resolution before he can fully understand his role in the unfolding crisis. They must leave Midgar behind, venture into the wider world, and follow whatever trail Sephiroth has left in his wake, trusting that the path will lead them toward understanding and ultimately confrontation with whatever nightmare has been unleashed. The world beyond Midgar is vast and varied, continents separated by oceans and connected by a history that predates Shinra's dominance by millennia. They travel first to Calm, a small town just outside Midgar's sphere of direct influence, a place that feels almost quaint after the oppressive industrial nightmare of the city. Here, in the relative safety of a town too small to warrant Shinra's constant attention, they take time to process what has happened, to share information and piece together the fragments of their individual knowledge into something approaching a coherent picture. Cloud tells his story, or tries to, recounting his history with Sephiroth and the incident that supposedly ended the legendary soldier's life 5 years ago. The memories come in fragments, disjointed pieces that do not quite fit together properly, but he pushes through the discomfort and confusion to explain what he remembers. He speaks of a mission to Nibelheim, Tifa's hometown in the mountains near Midgar, a routine inspection of the Mako reactor built near the village. Cloud claims he was there as a soldier first class, assigned to accompany Sephiroth and another operative named Zack Fair, tasked with investigating reports of malfunctions at the reactor. The mission started normally enough, or what passes for normal when dealing with Shinra's casual exploitation of the planet's resources. They arrived in Nibelheim, met with the locals including Tifa, who served as their guide through the mountain paths leading to the reactor, and began their inspection of the facility. But something went wrong inside the reactor, or rather, Sephiroth discovered something that shattered his understanding of his own nature and purpose. In the depths of the facility, in sealed chambers not meant for normal operations, they found evidence of experiments, containment tanks holding creatures that had been warped and twisted by exposure to Jenova cells, failed attempts at creating enhanced soldiers that resulted only in monsters and madness. Sephiroth saw his own reflection in those tanks, recognized his own nature in those experiments, and something broke inside him. He spent days locked in the mansion basement that served as Shinra's research facility in Nibelheim, reading through classified documents and scientific records, learning the truth about his creation. He was not born naturally but engineered, the product of Professor Gast, and later Professor Hojo's experiments with Jenova cells. injected into his mother's womb while she was pregnant to create a being with ancient abilities. Everything he thought he knew about himself was a lie, his existence the result of corporate ambition and scientific curiosity, rather than anything approaching normal human birth. The knowledge destroyed him or transformed him, the distinction unclear. Sephiroth emerged from his research with his sanity fractured and his loyalties shifted, no longer serving Shinra or humanity, but pursuing some vision of his own that involved Genova and the Cetra and ancient grudges he suddenly believed himself heir to. He set fire to Nibelheim, burning the town and everyone in it, determined to eliminate any evidence of Shinra's experiments and punish the humans who had dared to use him as a tool. Cloud confronted him at the reactor, tried to stop the massacre, and in the ensuing battle Sephiroth fell into the Mako reactor's core, his body consumed by the energy and presumably destroyed. The story explains much about their current situation, about why Sephiroth has returned and what he might be planning. But it also raises questions, inconsistencies in the narrative that the others notice, even if Cloud himself does not. Tifa, who was present during the Nibelheim incident, remembers events differently, recalls a young Shinra infantryman rather than a soldier operative, remembers Cloud arriving after the confrontation rather than participating in it. She says nothing immediately, unwilling to challenge Cloud's version of events publicly, but her troubled expression suggests doubts she cannot quite articulate, memories that do not align with what she is hearing. They decide to pursue Sephiroth across the continents, following rumors and sightings of the distinctive silver-haired figure, hoping to discover his intentions and stop whatever catastrophe he is planning. The journey takes them first to Junon, a coastal city that serves as Shinra's military headquarters, where massive cannons point toward the sky, and soldiers train in preparation for conflicts both domestic and foreign. They arrive to find the city in upheaval, Rufus Shinra being formally installed as the company's new president, following his father's murder, military forces assembling for some campaign that has not yet been announced to the public. Rufus is younger than his father, more ambitious in some ways and more pragmatic in others. His vision for Shinra focused less on maintaining the status quo and more on expansion and consolidation of power through whatever means prove most effective. He does not share his father's confidence that the corporation is untouchable. Instead, recognizing that Shinra's position requires constant reinforcement through displays of strength and swift elimination of threats. The era of ruling through economic dependence alone has ended with his father's death, replaced by a more militaristic approach that treats opposition as enemies to be destroyed rather than merely obstacles to be managed. The group infiltrates Junon disguised as members of Rufus's honor guard, blending in with the military pomp and ceremony surrounding the presidential inauguration. They plan to board the cargo ship that will transport Rufus and his entourage across the ocean to the western continent, using Shinra's own resources to facilitate their pursuit of Sephiroth, while staying one step ahead of the security forces hunting them. The plan works barely, their disguises holding up just long enough to get them aboard the ship before suspicions crystallize into action. The voyage across the ocean provides time for reflection and conversation, for the party members to share their individual stories and begin forming connections beyond simple alliance. Barrett speaks of Coral and his daughter Marlene, of the guilt he carries for survivors while his friends burned, of his determination to make Shinra pay for what they have taken from him and countless others. Red 13, who reveals his true name is Nanaki, shares his own history, speaking of Cosmo Canyon, where he was raised, and his uncertainty about his own nature and purpose, after years of captivity and experimentation. Aerith talks about the Cetra and what little she knows of her heritage, of growing up knowing she was different without understanding exactly what that difference meant or why it mattered to people like Shinra who wanted to exploit it. Tifa is quieter, her thoughts clearly occupied by the discrepancies between her memories and Cloud's narrative, by the mystery of what really happened in Nibelheim 5 years ago, and how Cloud fits into events that she remembers differently. She watches him when she thinks he is not looking, trying to reconcile the person in front of her with her recollections of a childhood friend who left their hometown to join Soldier and supposedly never made it past basic infantry training. Something is wrong, but she cannot identify exactly what or how to address it without potentially shattering Cloud's already fragile sense of self. They encounter the Turks again aboard the ship, Shinra's elite operatives pursuing their own mission that intersects with the party's presence. Elena has joined the group, a young woman new to the Turks who possesses enthusiasm that borders on naivety, her eagerness to prove herself making her simultaneously dangerous and predictable. The confrontation is inevitable but brief, both sides recognizing that a serious battle aboard a ship at sea risks sinking the entire vessel and killing everyone aboard regardless of who wins. They reach an unspoken agreement to postpone their conflict, to allow each other passage for now with the understanding that they will resume their antagonism once circumstances permit. The ship docks at Costa del Sol, a beach resort town that seems to exist in a different world entirely from the grim industrial reality of Midgar. Here, the wealthy and privileged come to escape their responsibilities, to bask in sunlight and luxury while conveniently forgetting about the exploitation and suffering that finances their leisure. The contrast is jarring. The casual extravagance of the resort existing side by side with villages where people struggle to afford basic necessities, where Shinra's Mako reactors drain the land and leave behind only exhaustion and decline. They learn that Sephiroth has been spotted in various locations, moving with purpose toward the northern continent, leaving behind traces of his passage and occasional casualties among those who attempt to interfere with his progress. The trail leads them inland from Costa del Sol, through mountain ranges and across deserts, into territories where Shinra's influence is less absolute and communities maintain some measure of independence from corporate control. These are places where the old world persists in fragments, where traditions and cultures predate Shinra's rise and maintain continuity despite the changes sweeping across the planet. In Coral, or rather in what remains of Coral, they find Barrett's past written in ash and ruins. The town was never rebuilt after Shinra burned it, left as a monument to what happens when communities trust the corporation and then suffer the consequences of that misplaced faith. Barrett walks through the ruins in silence, his face carved from stone, remembering friends and neighbors who died because he convinced them to accept Shinra's offer of a Mako reactor. The guilt he carries is visible in every line of his body, the weight of responsibility for decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but led to catastrophe he could not have anticipated. Nearby, perched above the ruins, sits the Gold Saucer, a massive amusement park that floats above the desert on anti-gravity technology, a monument to excess and entertainment that exists in deliberate contrast to the poverty below. The juxtaposition is obscene. A playground for the rich, built literally on top of the ashes of a community they helped destroy. But it is also a place where information flows freely, where people from across the world come to forget their troubles, and in the process share news and gossip that can prove valuable to those who know how to listen. They infiltrate the gold saucer in search of leads on Sephiroth's location, and what they find instead is a new companion. Cait Sith introduces himself as a fortune-telling cat, riding a giant stuffed Moogle, a combination so absurd that it initially seems like part of the amusement park's entertainment rather than a genuine character. But Cait Sith is more than he appears, possessing knowledge and abilities that suggest connections to larger organizations and agendas. He claims to have information about Sephiroth and offers to join their pursuit in exchange for being allowed to accompany them on their journey. His true nature will not be revealed until much later. The fact that Cait Sith is actually a remote-controlled robot operated by Reeve Tuesti, a Shinra executive who sympathizes with Avalanche's cause and seeks to undermine his own corporation from within. For now, he is simply another addition to their growing party, his contributions valued even as his motivations remain somewhat opaque. The group has expanded from its original core of Avalanche members into something larger and more diverse. Individuals from different backgrounds united by shared opposition to Shinra and shared concern about Sephiroth's plans. The trail leads them to the Temple of the Ancients, a massive structure built by the Cetra millennia ago. Its architecture impossible by modern standards, incorporating elements that seem to defy physics and rational explanation. The temple is a repository of knowledge about the ancients, their history and culture preserved in murals and artifacts that provide context for understanding what the Cetra were and what they attempted to achieve. Aerith feels drawn to this place in ways she cannot fully explain, her ancient heritage responding to something in the temple's design and purpose, connecting her to the history of her people in visceral ways that transcend intellectual understanding. Within the temple, they discover information about black materia, a legendary artifact of immense power that the ancients created and then sealed away, recognizing that its capabilities were too dangerous to be used under any circumstances. The black materia can summon meteor, calling down a massive celestial body that would impact the planet with enough force to cause extinction-level devastation. The ancients created this ultimate weapon and then hid it, understanding that possessing such power inevitably leads to temptation to use it, that the existence of world-ending capabilities makes their deployment more likely, rather than serving as pure deterrent. Sephiroth seeks the black materia. His plan, pieced together from fragments and implications, involves summoning meteor to wound the planet so severely that the live stream will gather at the impact point to heal the damage, and in that moment of convergence, he will absorb the concentrated energy and achieve something approaching godhood. It is a plan of staggering scope and ambition, requiring him to orchestrate planetary-scale catastrophe in service of personal ascension. The fact that it would kill billions and potentially destroy the planet entirely seems not to concern him, or perhaps that destruction is part of the point. Revenge against a world that created him as a weapon and then dared to be horrified by what they had made. They race to secure the black materia before Sephiroth can claim it. Navigating the temple of the ancients' impossible geometry and solving puzzles left by the ancients to test anyone who sought access to their most dangerous creation. But they are too late, or not late enough. The temporal relationship between their arrival and Sephiroth's presence unclear in a place where time seems to flow differently than outside. Sephiroth appears before them, his presence commanding and terrible, his eyes cold with purpose that admits no doubt or hesitation. The confrontation in the temple reveals the depth of Cloud's connection to Sephiroth and the instability underlying his sense of self. When Sephiroth speaks to him, the silver-haired warrior addresses Cloud not as an enemy, but as something else. using language that suggests intimacy and shared history that goes beyond what Cloud has told the others. Sephiroth calls him a puppet, implies that Cloud's memories are not his own, that his very identity is a construction layered over something more complex and damaged. The words trigger a crisis in Cloud, his reality fragmenting as he struggles to maintain coherent sense of who and what he is. Sephiroth manipulates Cloud directly, exploiting whatever connection exists between them to override Cloud's will and control his actions. Cloud's body moves without his consent, his hands reaching for the black materia and delivering it to Sephiroth, despite his desperate mental resistance. He is a passenger in his own body, watching himself betray his companions and doom the world, powerless to stop actions that feel like someone else is moving his limbs like a marionette strings. The experience is violating and terrifying. Proof that whatever Sephiroth claims about Cloud being a puppet contains at least some truth, that his autonomy is not as absolute as he believed. With the black materia in his possession, Sephiroth departs, leaving Cloud collapsed and unresponsive, his mind retreating from the trauma of being controlled and the implications of what it means for his identity. The others gather around him, uncertain how to help, recognizing that whatever is wrong with Cloud goes deeper than physical injury or simple psychological trauma. Something fundamental about his construction as a person is unstable, and Sephiroth's interference has destabilized it to the point where he can no longer maintain the facade of wholeness. Tifa stays with Cloud while he recovers, sitting vigil and speaking to him, even when he does not respond, determined to anchor him with her presence and the reality of their shared history. She talks about Nibelheim before it burned, about their childhood together, about promises made under the stars on a water tower that felt impossibly important at the time, and have only grown more significant with age and distance. Her voice is a lifeline, something real and true that Cloud can hold on to, even as his sense of self threatens to dissolve entirely. Cloud eventually recovers enough to travel, though he remains fragile and uncertain, his confidence shattered by the revelation that his memories and identity might be less stable than he believed. The group makes plans to pursue Sephiroth to the northern crater, the impact site where Genova first crashed into the planet 2,000 years ago, where Sephiroth apparently believes he can summon Meteor and achieve his transcendence. But before they can embark on that final pursuit, Aerith makes a decision that will define everything that follows. She's been researching the ancients' knowledge, studying the murals and texts left in the temple, and she has discovered something that might counter Meteor if it is summoned. Holy, a defensive magic of immense power, can potentially stop Meteor's impact, prevent the catastrophe that Sephiroth plans to unleash. But Holy is sealed within white materia that only she, as the last Cetra, can activate. And activating it requires her to travel to the Forgotten Capital, a place sacred to the ancients located in the northern reaches of the world, and pray for the planet's deliverance from the threat Sephiroth represents. Aerith knows this will be dangerous. She knows that traveling to the Forgotten Capital, especially alone, makes her vulnerable to Sephiroth's interference, but she also knows that someone must attempt to counter his plan, that allowing him to summon Meteor without opposition guarantees the destruction he seeks. So she makes her choice, slipping away from the group while they rest, taking only the white materia and her determination to fulfill what she sees as her responsibility as the last living ancient. Cloud wakes to find her gone, recognizes immediately where she has gone and what she intends to do. The group pursues her to the Forgotten Capital, racing across the northern continent with desperate speed, knowing that every moment's delay brings Aerith closer to whatever fate awaits her in that place of ancient memory. The forgotten capital is beautiful and melancholy. Crystalline structures that echo Cetra architecture rising from the landscape like frozen music. Buildings constructed by a civilization that no longer exists. Monuments to achievement and loss intertwined. They find Aerith in the heart of the capital, kneeling in prayer before an altar surrounded by water, her face serene as she connects with the planet in ways they cannot perceive, calling upon Holy to counter the threat of Meteor. The white materia glows with inner light, responding to her prayer, and for a moment it seems they have arrived in time, that she will complete her task, and they can protect her from whatever danger might follow. Then Sephiroth descends from above, dropping through the air like a falling angel, his Masamune blade extended before him. Time seems to slow, the moment stretching into terrible clarity as the sword pierces through Aerith's back and emerges from her chest. A clean thrust that kills instantly, denying her even the chance to cry out or understand what has happened. Blood stains the water around her, spreading in patterns that seem almost intentional in their symmetry. And then she collapses forward, her body sliding off the blade to fall into the pool below. Cloud screams, a sound of pure anguish and rage that echoes through the crystalline structures, and moves to attack Sephiroth with every intention of tearing him apart, regardless of the cost. But Sephiroth simply smiles, satisfied with what he has accomplished, and vanishes before Cloud can reach him, teleporting away to the northern crater and leaving them alone with Aerith's body and the knowledge that she is gone. The last Cetra murdered in the completion of her final prayer. The death is absolute and permanent. There is no miraculous resurrection, no last-minute intervention, no way to undo what Sephiroth has done. Aerith is simply gone. Her life ended in a moment of violence that feels simultaneously shocking and inevitable. The culmination of a trajectory that began when Shinra first learned about her existence and decided she was a resource to be exploited, rather than a person deserving of protection. Cloud carries her body to the water's edge, lays her down with a gentleness that contrasts sharply with the violence of her death, and they hold a small ceremony, acknowledging her passing and the hole her absence leaves in their group. The white materia sinks into the water, lost in the depths, and with it goes whatever chance Holy represented for stopping Meteor. Aerith succeeded in activating it, her prayer completed before Sephiroth struck, but whether Holy will respond without her continued presence to guide, it remains uncertain. They have lost not just a friend, but potentially their only counter to Sephiroth's plan, and the grief of her death is compounded by the fear that her sacrifice might ultimately prove meaningless if Holy fails to manifest or arrives too late to matter. The journey to the northern crater proceeds under a pall of mourning and determination. They will stop Sephiroth, will prevent Meteor's summoning if possible, or die trying, because failing to at least attempt opposition would dishonor Aerith's sacrifice and condemn the planet to destruction. The northern crater is a wound in the world, the impact site still visible after 2 millennia, a vast depression in the northern continent where Genova crashed and nearly destroyed the Cetra civilization. The area radiates wrongness, the life stream visible through cracks in the earth, reality itself thin and damaged in ways that have never properly healed. They descend into the crater, fighting through monsters and obstacles that seem almost incidental compared to their primary objective, their progress marked by increasing proximity to the concentrated life stream energy at the crater's center. The deeper they go, the more Cloud's mental state deteriorates, memories surfacing and contradicting each other, his sense of identity fragmenting under the pressure of proximity to Jenova and Sephiroth's influence. Tifa tries to support him, but she is struggling with her own questions about what really happened in Nibelheim and how Cloud's version of events differs so dramatically from her own recollections. At the crater's heart, they find Sephiroth, or something wearing Sephiroth's form, encased in Mako crystal and surrounded by manifested fragments of Jenova that serve as his avatars and defenders. The distinction between Sephiroth and Jenova has blurred. The two entities merged into something singular that possesses characteristics of both. Sephiroth's will guiding Jenova's power toward goals that serve his vision of ascension. He has been manipulating events from this location, sending out Jenova cells that allow him to appear in multiple places simultaneously, creating the trail of sightings that led the party across the world. Sephiroth addresses them from his crystal prison, speaks to Cloud specifically, and reveals truths that shatter what remains of Cloud's constructed identity. Cloud was never in Soldier. He never achieved the rank of first class, never served alongside Sephiroth as an elite operative. He was simply a Shinra infantry soldier, one of countless anonymous grunts who received basic training and was sent on the mission to Nibelheim as part of the security detail. He was there when Sephiroth went mad, witnessed the massacre of his hometown, but his role was peripheral rather than central. After Sephiroth fell into the reactor's Mako core, Cloud and Zack Fair, the actual soldier first class on that mission, were captured by Shinra and subjected to experiments by Professor Hojo. The scientist used them as test subjects for his Jenova project, injecting them with Jenova cells and exposing them to massive doses of Mako energy in attempts to create artificial Sephiroth clones. Most subjects died or went insane from the process, but Cloud and Zack survived, though heavily damaged by the experience. Zack eventually escaped with the catatonic Cloud, carrying his friend across the world toward Midgar in safety. But Shinra forces caught up with them just outside the city, and Zack died defending Cloud from the soldiers sent to eliminate witnesses to Hojo's experiments. Cloud, mentally shattered by the experimentation and Zack's death, constructed a new identity from fragments of memory and aspiration, combining Zack's stories of his time in Soldier with his own desire to have become someone important, creating a personality that could function when his actual self was too damaged to maintain consciousness. The revelation destroys what remains of Cloud's sense of self. Everything he believed about his identity was a lie or a construction. His memories borrowed or fabricated. His achievements actually belonging to someone else who died protecting him. He is not a hero or a former soldier or anyone significant. Just a failed experiment who cannot distinguish between his own experiences and those he absorbed from someone else. The crisis is complete. His mind shutting down under the weight of contradictions it cannot reconcile, and he falls into a catatonic state, present physically but mentally absent, retreated into some interior space where reality cannot reach him. Sephiroth laughs at Cloud's collapse, satisfied to have broken his puppet one final time, and summons Meteor. The black materia activates, calling down from space an enormous celestial body that begins accelerating toward the planet, a countdown to apocalypse initiated and now effectively unstoppable. The planet responds to the threat, the lifestream manifesting weapons of its own, massive creatures designed to defend against threats to the world's survival. But the weapons are indiscriminate in their defense, attacking anything they perceive as danger regardless of whether it actually threatens the planet, and several target human settlements including Midgar and other population centers. The northern crater begins to collapse, unstable after Meteor's summoning, and the party barely escapes with Cloud's unresponsive body. They emerge onto the world's surface to find everything changed. Meteor visible in the sky growing larger day by day. Weapons rampaging across continents destroying anything in their path. And Cloud completely unresponsive to any attempt to reach him. They have lost, or feel like they have lost. Their strongest fighter reduced to a helpless burden. Their enemies triumphant. And the world spiraling toward extinction with no apparent way to prevent it. Tifa refuses to accept this ending. She believes that somewhere inside Cloud's fractured mind, her actual childhood friend still exists, that the real Cloud strife is buried beneath the constructed identity and the trauma, but not completely destroyed. While the others search for ways to counter Meteor and the weapons, Tifa stays with Cloud, attempting to reach him through their shared history, to help him piece together a genuine sense of self from the wreckage of false memories and borrowed identity. The process of reconstruction happens in a place called the Lifestream, where Cloud's consciousness has retreated to escape the contradictions destroying his sense of self. Tifa follows him into that space of pure life energy and memory, and together they sort through Cloud's actual experiences, separating what really happened from what he wanted to believe or absorbed from Zack. The real Cloud strife was a shy child from Nibelheim, who admired Tifa from afar, who promised to become a soldier and protect her when they were teenagers, who left their hometown and joined Shinra's military, but never achieved the success he dreamed of. He was present at the Nibelheim incident, but as an anonymous soldier rather than a main participant. He witnessed Sephiroth's madness and tried to stop him, was severely injured in the confrontation, and spent the next 5 years as Hojo's experimental subject, his mind shattered by torture and augmentation. Everything he claimed about being in Soldier was drawn from Zack's stories and his own unfulfilled aspirations, his mind constructing a narrative that would allow him to function when the truth was too painful to confront. But that does not mean he is worthless or without strength. The person who has been traveling with them, fighting alongside them, forming bonds and relationships and making choices, that person is also real, a synthesis of Cloud's actual self and the identity he constructed from necessity. He is not the person he claimed to be, but he is not nothing either. He is Cloud Strife, flawed and damaged but genuine, and recognizing the truth of his past allows him to move forward with a more stable sense of self, integrated rather than fractured. Cloud wakes from his catatonic state with Tifa's help, his identity reconstructed on more honest foundations, accepting both his actual history and the person he has become through struggle and choice. He is no longer the confident soldier he pretended to be, but he is also no longer the person whose sense of self could be shattered by revelation. He knows who he is now, understands his own history with clarity that was impossible when living in constructed fantasy, and that knowledge provides strength that mere borrowed confidence never could. The group reunites with renewed purpose. Cloud returned to them changed but functional, and they make plans for a final assault on Sephiroth. Meteor continues to approach, growing larger in the sky with each passing day, and calculations suggest it will impact in a matter of weeks at most. Holy has not activated despite Aerith's prayer, the white materia remaining dormant for reasons no one understands, leaving them without the counter they desperately need. But giving up is not an option, not while they still draw breath, not while any possibility remains of preventing the apocalypse. They must return to the northern crater, must descend once more into that wound in the world, and confront Sephiroth directly. If they can defeat him, if they can destroy whatever he has become through his merger with Genova, Perhaps his hold on Meteor will break and allow Holy to activate. It is a slim hope based on incomplete understanding, but it is hope nonetheless, and hope is sufficient when no alternatives remain. The path requires them to first neutralize the weapons that rampage across the world, massive creatures of living life stream that attack anything they perceive as threats. Diamond Weapon assaults Midgar directly, its enormous body emerging from the ocean to attack Shinra headquarters, apparently recognizing the corporation as the source of humanity's assault on the planet through Mako extraction. The battle is cataclysmic, the weapons attacks tearing through the city despite Shinra's military defense, and for a moment it seems Midgar itself might fall. But the party intervenes, not to save Shinra, but to prevent the weapon from killing thousands of innocent civilians who happen to live in the city. They fight the massive creature in a desperate battle that pushes their abilities to their limits, attacking weak points and exploiting vulnerabilities until finally the weapon falls, its body collapsing and dissolving back into pure lifestream. The victory is Pyrrhic, the damage to Midgar extensive, and casualties significant, but it clears the path for them to return to the northern crater without the weapons interfering. Inside the crater, they battle through Genova's final forms, avatars of the entity that represent its full power unleashed without restraint. Each battle strips away more of the distinction between Genova and Sephiroth, revealing the merged consciousness that drives their opposition, an alien intelligence wearing human ambition like a mask. The battles test everything they have learned and gained, require perfect coordination and use of abilities they have developed across their journey, demonstrate how much they have grown from the amateur resistors who bombed their first reactor. Finally, they reach Sephiroth himself, the core consciousness that has orchestrated everything, and the final battle begins. It is not one fight but several, Sephiroth manifesting in different forms as they destroy each incarnation, his power seeming limitless, drawing from the lifestream itself to sustain his attacks. He wields magic and swordplay with equal mastery, attacks that warp reality and assault their minds as well as their bodies, demonstrating why he was considered the greatest soldier before his fall into madness and transcendence. But they have something he does not, something that no amount of power or individual skill can replicate. They fight together, each member supporting the others, their bonds forged through shared suffering and triumph, giving them strength that transcends mere addition of individual capabilities. When one falls, others cover their recovery. When attacks seem impossible to counter, combined techniques create openings where none should exist. They are a team, a unit, perhaps even a family, and that connection allows them to stand against someone who has surpassed human limitations but lost everything that makes those limitations meaningful. Cloud delivers the final blow, his sword piercing through Sephiroth's chest in deliberate mirror of how Aerith died, and for a moment everything stops, the certainty of victory and the terror of what comes next existing simultaneously. Sephiroth looks down at the blade protruding from his body, almost surprised, and then he smiles one final time before his form begins to dissolve, his consciousness unraveling as the connection to Genova and the lifestream that sustained him is severed. But defeating Sephiroth does not immediately resolve the crisis. Meteor continues falling toward the planet, its descent now unstoppable through any conventional means, mere days away from impact that will sterilize the surface and potentially destroy all life. The party escapes the collapsing northern crater, fighting their way back to the surface through tremors and cave-ins, emerging into daylight to see Meteor dominating the sky, so large now that it blots out the sun in places. casting vast shadows across entire continents. Then, finally, Holy awakens. The white materia responds to Aerith's prayer, now that Sephiroth's interference has ended, rising from the depths of the forgotten capital where it sank after her death. The defensive magic manifests as a barrier of brilliant light, expanding to encompass the entire planet, a shield meant to deflect meteor before it can impact. For a moment, hope surges through everyone watching, the belief that they have succeeded, that Aerith's sacrifice was not in vain, that Holy will save them. But something goes wrong. Holy's power, while immense, proves insufficient to completely stop Meteor's momentum. The celestial body breaks through the barrier partially, its trajectory altered, but not fully deflected, still descending toward the planet with enough force to cause catastrophic damage. The two opposing forces, Meteor's destructive potential and Holy's protective magic, clash in the upper atmosphere, creating energies that threaten to tear reality itself apart at the point of contact. The planet makes one final desperate gambit. The life stream itself erupts from beneath the surface, responding to the threat of total extinction by manifesting directly, no longer constrained by the physical boundaries that normally contain it. Great torrents of green energy burst through the earth in locations around the world, gathering toward the impact point, adding their power to Holy's defense. It is the planet's own life force, every soul that has ever lived and returned to the cycle, manifesting to protect the continuation of life itself. And among that life stream energy, guiding it, focusing it toward where it is needed most, is Aerith. Her consciousness persists within the life stream, no longer alive in the conventional sense, but not entirely gone either. Her spirit joined with the planet's collective memory and using that connection to coordinate the defense. She appears as a vision to some who watch, her image formed from light and life energy, her expression serene as she orchestrates the counter to Meteor that she could not complete while alive. The combined force of Holy and the life stream collides with Meteor mere miles above the planet's surface, the energies meeting with a detonation of light and power that can be seen from anywhere on the world. For several eternal seconds, the outcome hangs in balance, opposing forces locked in stalemate, and then slowly, impossibly, Meteor begins to disintegrate, its mass torn apart by energies that reduce it to harmless debris that burns up in the atmosphere or scatters into space. The threat is neutralized, the world saved through the sacrifice of its last ancient and the intervention of the planet itself. The party finds themselves in Midgar when Meteor is destroyed, having returned to the city to evacuate civilians before the expected impact. They stand together watching the sky, seeing Meteor dissolve and the life stream recede back beneath the surface, and they understand that they have succeeded but at terrible cost. Aerith is gone, truly and finally, her spirit consumed in the effort of guiding the life stream's defense. Sephiroth is destroyed, his threat ended, but his legacy of manipulation and destruction, leaving scars that will take generations to heal. The world survives, but it is changed, diminished by what was lost even as it is preserved. They escape Midgar as the city crumbles around them. The damage from weapon attacks and the energies released during Meteor's destruction finally overwhelming infrastructure that was already strained beyond capacity. The upper plate collapses, falling onto the ruins of the sectors below, and the once mighty city of Midgar becomes a tomb, its era of dominance ended by forces its architects never anticipated and could not control. Shinra's headquarters is buried in the rubble, the corporation effectively destroyed as a coherent entity, its president dead and its infrastructure obliterated. In the aftermath, the survivors must rebuild. The world they knew is gone, transformed by revelation and catastrophe into something unfamiliar, requiring new approaches and new thinking. Mako reactors lie dormant or destroyed, forcing humanity to rediscover alternative energy sources or develop new technologies that do not rely on draining the planet's life force. Communities scattered by the crisis must reconnect and reorganize, establishing new social structures to replace the Shinra-dominated order that controlled their lives for decades. The environmental damage caused by years of Mako extraction begins to heal, slowly, the lifestream replenishing itself, now that it is no longer being systematically drained. Forests that withered begin showing new growth. Species that were declining start recovering. Rivers run clearer as pollution from reactors stops flowing into them. The planet demonstrates remarkable resilience when given even small opportunity to restore itself, and people witness firsthand how quickly nature reclaims spaces when corporate exploitation is removed. But the scars remain, both physical and psychological. Entire cities were destroyed or severely damaged during the crisis, populations displaced, and families torn apart by events beyond their control or understanding. The revelation of Shinra's crimes and experiments, the extent of their manipulation and disregard for human life, creates a crisis of trust that will take generations to overcome. How do you rebuild society when the previous order was founded on lies and exploitation? When the comfortable narratives people believed about progress and prosperity are revealed as propaganda covering systematic abuse? Cloud and his companions separate after the immediate crisis passes, each needing to find their own path forward in this changed world. Barrett focuses on rebuilding what was lost, helping communities recover and organizing efforts to develop sustainable alternatives to Mako energy. His experience with Corel and Sector 7, with loss and reconstruction, makes him uniquely qualified to help others navigate the trauma of displacement and destruction, to build something better from the ashes of what was taken from them. Tifa remains close to Cloud, the bond between them deepened by their shared history, and the ordeal of reconstructing his fractured identity in the livestream. They discuss what it means to move forward when the past is so complicated, how to build a future when your foundation is understanding that much of what you believed about yourself was false or incomplete. Cloud is no longer the confident warrior he pretended to be, but he is real now, authentic in ways that his constructed identity never achieved, and that authenticity allows for genuine connection impossible when living behind masks. Red 13 returns to Cosmo Canyon, his home in the desert canyons where his tribe resides, finally able to reconnect with his heritage and understand his place within it. His time with the party taught him about bonds that transcend species and shared blood, about family that is chosen rather than inherited, and he carries those lessons back to his people as they navigate their own relationship with a changed world. Kate Sith, revealed as Reeve Tuesti's avatar, becomes instrumental in reorganizing what remains of Shinra's infrastructure toward constructive purposes. Not all of the corporation's resources were devoted to exploitation and control, and Reeve works to redirect the remainder toward reconstruction and reparations, attempting to make some measure of amends for the damage his organization inflicted on the world. It is insufficient. No amount of good works can fully balance the scales against Shinra's crimes, but doing nothing would be worse. Yuffie returns to Wutai, her homeland that maintained precarious independence from Shinra, through combination of geographical isolation and diplomatic maneuvering. She brings with her stories of the outside world and the crisis that nearly destroyed everything. helping her people understand how close they came to sharing the fate of nations that fell under Shinra's direct control. Her perspective, shaped by traveling with the party and witnessing events firsthand, influences Wutai's approach to engaging with the post-Shinra world. Vincent Valentine, who joined their journey from his self-imposed exile in Nibelheim's mansion, grapples with his own relationship to Shinra's crimes and his unwilling participation in the experiments that created Sephiroth. He was once a Turk, loyal to the corporation, and in love with Lucretia, a scientist working on the Genova project, who eventually became Sephiroth's mother. Vincent's transformation into something partially inhuman was punishment and consequence for trying to oppose the experiments, and he carries guilt for not doing more to prevent the creation of the monster who nearly destroyed the world. Sid Highwind, the pilot and engineer who dreamed of space exploration before Shinra's exploitation of his research ended that dream, finds new purpose in developing technology for a world no longer dominated by Mako energy. His expertise with machines and his refusal to accept limitations make him invaluable in the reconstruction, designing systems and vehicles that can function without relying on the planet's life force for power. The world that emerges from the crisis is neither utopia nor wasteland, but something in between, damaged but healing, struggling but determined. The removal of Shinra's dominance creates vacuum that different groups attempt to fill, some with genuine concern for building something better, and others seeing only opportunity for new forms of exploitation. The party members, each in their own way, work to ensure that whatever society emerges from the ruins incorporates lessons learned through their ordeal, that the mistakes of the past are not simply repeated with different faces. 500 years pass, or perhaps 500 years is simply the perspective we are shown in the final vision. The passage of time transforms Midgar's ruins into something almost natural, metal corroding and being reclaimed by vegetation, the angular geometry of human construction softened by centuries of weather and growth. The world has moved forward, life has continued, and what seemed like civilizational apocalypse in the moment becomes simply another chapter in the planet's long history, significant but not final. Red 13 appears in this distant future, his species apparently long-lived enough that the same individual who fought alongside Cloud still walks the Earth centuries later. He runs through the overgrown ruins with cubs following behind him, suggesting that life found ways to continue and flourish even after everything that happened, that the crisis was a near-death experience for civilization rather than its actual ending. The planet endured, and with it came new generations who carry forward the story, shaped by what came before but not imprisoned by it. The ambiguity of this ending is intentional, leaving open questions about humanity's fate and role in the world that survives. Did humans go extinct, or did they simply move beyond the ruins of their old cities into new ways of living that leave lighter footprints on the world? Are Red 13's cubs running through a cemetery of a dead civilization, or a monument to one that learned and evolved? The game does not provide definitive answers, trusting viewers to interpret based on their own hopes and fears about humanity's capacity for change. What remains clear is that the planet itself survives, that life continues in forms both familiar and transformed, that the life stream flows uninterrupted by the extraction and exploitation that nearly destroyed it. The immediate crisis of Meteor was prevented, Sephiroth's plan of ascension thwarted, and the world was given another chance to continue its existence. What was done with that chance? How subsequent generations built upon the foundation of survival becomes questions for different stories in different times. The narrative of Final Fantasy VII operates on multiple levels simultaneously, functioning as personal drama about identity and memory, political allegory about corporate power and environmental destruction, philosophical exploration of consciousness and what constitutes authentic selfhood, and mythological epic about the eternal struggle between preservation and transformation. Each level reinforces the others, creating a story that rewards engagement at whatever depth viewers choose to invest. Cloud's journey from constructed identity to authentic self mirrors the larger narrative about seeing through comfortable lies to face difficult truths. Just as Cloud must confront the reality that his memories and sense of self were built on borrowed experiences and wishful thinking, the world must face that its prosperity and advancement were purchased through exploitation and environmental destruction. Both the individual and the collective must reckon with how much of their comfortable existence was founded on unsustainable practices and denial of inconvenient realities. The game's treatment of memory and identity raises questions that remain relevant regardless of setting or technology. How much of who we are depends on accurate recollection of our past versus the narrative we construct about our experiences? If our memories are flawed or influenced by trauma, does that make us false, or does it simply make us human? Cloud's crisis is extreme. His memories literally borrowed from someone else through supernatural means. But the underlying anxiety about the reliability of memory and the stability of identity resonates with universal human experience of questioning ourselves and our histories. Aerith's death remains one of gaming's most impactful moments, specifically because it refuses the conventions that usually protect important characters. She is not merely injured or captured or placed in suspended animation with the promise of eventual revival. She dies, suddenly and brutally, in a cutscene that removes player agency and prevents intervention. The game forces you to confront her absence, to continue the journey without her, to feel the weight of permanent loss, rather than offering the comfortable escape of resurrection or recovery. The decision to kill Aerith serves multiple narrative purposes beyond mere shock value. It demonstrates that Sephiroth represents genuine threat, rather than merely an obstacle to be overcome through sufficient grinding and preparation. It raises the stakes of the conflict to personal levels, making opposition to Sephiroth's plan about vengeance and prevention, rather than merely saving abstract populations. And it forces the remaining party members, and by extension the player, to continue despite grief and loss, to find strength to move forward even when victory cannot undo what was taken. Her death also connects thematically to the game's environmental message. Aerith is the last Cetra, the final living connection to people who understood the planet as a living entity deserving of respect, rather than a resource to be exploited. Her murder by Sephiroth, who represents the ultimate expression of what happens when beings pursue power without wisdom, symbolizes humanity's severing of its connection to natural understanding and harmony. That she continues to exist within the lifestream after death, that her consciousness persists to help guide the planet's defense, suggests that genuine connection to the world transcends individual mortality. The lifestream itself functions as the game's central metaphor, representing both the interconnection of all living things and the cycles of death and rebirth that sustain existence. Energy and consciousness flow through the lifestream, returning to it at death and emerging again in new life, creating continuity that transcends individual existence. Shinra's Mako extraction disrupts this cycle, drawing energy out faster than it can be replenished, creating the planetary equivalent of bleeding out through wounds that never heal. This environmental theme resonates beyond the game's fantasy setting, reflecting real-world concerns about resource exploitation and environmental degradation. The parallels to fossil fuel extraction, to deforestation, to any number of human activities that prioritize immediate profit over long-term sustainability make Shinra's villainy feel grounded despite the fantastic elements surrounding it. The corporation's crimes are not abstract or foreign, but recognizable, making the opposition to them feel relevant and urgent, rather than merely fantastical adventure. The game's structure, moving from focused environmental activism to world-spanning quest to prevent apocalypse, mirrors the expanding understanding of how interconnected systems function. What begins as local resistance to specific reactors grows into recognition that the problem is systematic rather than isolated, that Shinra's exploitation is merely one symptom of larger issues with how humanity relates to the world. The progression from small-scale resistance to confrontation with planetary-scale threats reflects the journey from recognizing individual injustices to understanding systemic problems that require comprehensive solutions. Sephiroth's characterization as villain draws power from his relationship to Cloud and his position as someone who was created rather than born. He is a victim of Shinra's experiments who became victimizer on an incomprehensible scale, someone whose response to learning about his own exploitation was to embrace and exceed the worst impulses of those who created him. His plan to wound the planet and absorb its healing energy represents the ultimate expression of treating the world as resource, rather than entity deserving of respect, taking Shinra's philosophy to its logical extreme. His connection to Genova adds layers of ambiguity about agency and identity. Is Sephiroth driving Genova's power toward his own goals? Or is Genova manipulating Sephiroth while wearing his face and using his memories? The game deliberately leaves this unclear, suggesting that the distinction may be meaningless when two consciousnesses merge as completely as they have. What emerges is something that possesses characteristics of both, driven by goals that serve neither's original nature, but rather represent a synthesis of alien hunger and human megalomania. The supporting cast, each with their own traumas and relationships to Shinra's exploitation, provides perspective on how systematic oppression affects individuals differently. Barrett's community was destroyed for corporate convenience. Aerith spent her life evading exploitation by researchers who saw her as fascinating test subject rather than person. Tifa lost her father and hometown to Sephiroth's madness, which was itself caused by Shinra's experiments. Red 13 was captured and studied like an animal despite his obvious intelligence and capacity for suffering. Each character's personal stake in opposing Shinra creates investment in the larger struggle that pure ideology alone might not sustain. They fight not just because exploitation is wrong in abstract sense, but because they have personally suffered its consequences, because they carry scars both literal and psychological that remind them constantly of what happens when power concentrates without accountability. Their diverse backgrounds and experiences prevent the narrative from reducing to simple good versus evil, instead presenting a coalition of damaged people united by shared recognition that the current system is intolerable. The revelation about Cloud's true history serves not to diminish him, but to make his heroism more meaningful. He is not naturally gifted or destined for greatness, but rather someone who was repeatedly broken by circumstances and chose to keep moving forward despite having every reason to give up. His strength comes not from being special, but from refusing to accept helplessness, from building identity and capability from wreckage through effort and the support of others who believed in him when he could not believe in himself. This democratization of heroism, the suggestion that courage and moral action are available to anyone regardless of background or natural ability, contrast sharply with the chosen one narratives that dominate much fantasy storytelling. Cloud is not selected by prophecy or blessed with unique gifts that mark him as destined savior. He is simply someone who was in the right place at the right time, or wrong place at wrong time depending on perspective, and who made choices to oppose injustice when he could have simply looked away. The game's world building creates a setting that feels lived in and real despite its fantastic elements. Each location has history and culture that exists independent of the main plot. Communities with their own concerns and conflicts that do not simply pause while the heroes save the world. The Gold Saucer exists as entertainment destination with no connection to Sephiroth's plans. Wutai maintains its traditions and independence. Despite pressure from Shinra, Cosmo Canyon preserves knowledge about the planet and livestream that predates modern civilization. This sense of a world that extends beyond the immediate narrative creates immersion that makes the stakes feel genuine rather than merely mechanical. When Meteor threatens to destroy the planet, it is not destroying an abstract setting, but places we have visited and people we have met, communities with their own value independent of their relevance to the main plot. The catastrophe matters not just because it threatens the protagonist, but because it threatens everything and everyone, including those who have no connection to the central conflict, but will suffer its consequences nonetheless. The music, composed by Nobuo Uematsu, reinforces emotional beats and creates atmosphere that enhances every aspect of the story. Aerith's theme, gentle and melancholic, becomes associated with her character to the point where hearing it triggers emotional response independent of visual context. One-Winged Angel, Sephiroth's theme, combines orchestra and choir to create sense of apocalyptic grandeur appropriate to his role as world-threatening antagonist. The main theme captures both adventure and melancholy, promise and loss intertwined in melody that defines the game's emotional landscape. Key moments are inseparable from their musical accompaniment. Aerith's death occurs in silence after the impact, the absence of music making the moment feel more real and shocking. The battle with Safer Sephiroth is underscored by One-Winged Angel's driving intensity, the music itself becoming part of the confrontation's overwhelming force. Quiet moments between characters are accompanied by gentle themes that create space for emotional processing between action sequences. The visual presentation, while limited by PlayStation hardware of 1997, demonstrates remarkable artistry within its constraints. Pre-rendered backgrounds create detailed environments that suggest depth and history through careful composition and lighting. Character models, blocky and simple during regular gameplay, transform during full-motion video cutscenes into more detailed representations that convey emotion and movement with surprising effectiveness. The contrast between gameplay and cutscene visuals actually enhances key moments, the shift in presentation quality signaling that something important is happening. Midgar's design, with its layered structure separating rich from poor through literal elevation, creates immediate visual metaphor for class division that requires no exposition to understand. The dim corridors of Shinra headquarters, sterile and imposing, contrast sharply with the organic chaos of the slums. The northern crater's alien geometry and visible lifestream create atmosphere of wrongness appropriate to the final confrontation setting. Each major location has distinctive visual identity that makes it memorable and reinforces its thematic role in the narrative. The materia system, while primarily a gameplay mechanic, connects to the story's themes about magic and the planet's energy. Materia are crystallized lifestream, fragments of the planet's essence that allow users to channel various abilities. Equipping and combining materia becomes a form of engaging with the planet's power, learning to work with its energy rather than simply extracting it for fuel. The system's flexibility encourages experimentation and rewards understanding of how different materia interact, creating mechanical expression of the narrative's emphasis on cooperation and synthesis. Limit breaks, powerful attacks that become available when characters suffer significant damage, embody the theme of finding strength through adversity. Each character's limit breaks reflect their personality and fighting style, from Cloud's overwhelming physical strikes to Aerith's protective and healing abilities, to Barrett's explosive firepower. The requirement to be pushed to the edge before accessing these powerful techniques creates mechanical reinforcement of the narrative's message about heroism emerging from struggle rather than being inherent trait. The optional content, including super bosses and hidden areas, expands the world without requiring engagement for story completion. Players can complete the main narrative without confronting the weapons directly, without breeding chocobos to access hidden locations, without pursuing the various side quests that offer additional character development and powerful equipment. This optional depth rewards investment, while not punishing those who focus primarily on the central story, creating layers of engagement for different types of players. The weapons themselves serve as manifestation of the planet's immune response. Creatures of pure lifestream energy, created to defend against threats. Their indiscriminate attacks on human settlements, treating civilization as infection to be eliminated, raises uncomfortable questions about humanity's relationship with the world. If the planet itself perceives humans as threat, if the natural immune response is to destroy human civilization, what does that suggest about how humanity has been treating the world? The fact that the party must fight against both Shinra's exploitation and the planet's defensive response creates moral complexity that simple ecological narratives often lack. Ruby Weapon and Emerald Weapon, optional superbosses that represent the game's ultimate mechanical challenges, exist as tests of player mastery, disconnected from narrative necessity. Defeating them requires understanding of systems at deep level, careful preparation and strategy execution that goes beyond what the main story demands. Their presence creates aspirational goals for players who want to fully master the game's mechanics, while their optional nature ensures the story remains accessible to those less interested in mechanical optimization. The dating mechanics, where relationship values with different characters determine which one accompanies Cloud on the Gold Saucer date, add layer of player agency to character relationships. While the outcomes do not substantially affect the main plot, they provide moments of character development and allow players to express preference for which relationships they want to emphasize. The fact that male characters, including Barrett, can be Cloud's date reflects progressive inclusivity unusual for the era and adds variety to replay experiences. The translation from Japanese to English, while imperfect and occasionally awkward by modern standards, successfully conveyed the story's essence and emotional core to Western audiences. Certain phrases and characterizations became iconic despite or because of their quirks, entering gaming culture and remaining recognizable decades later. The line, "This guy is sick," becomes memorable precisely because of its grammatical error, while more polished translation might have been forgotten. The imperfections give the text character and make it feel like a human creation, rather than sterile corporate product. The game's influence on subsequent RPGs cannot be overstated, establishing conventions and expectations that define the genre for years afterward. The combination of science fiction and fantasy elements, the emphasis on cinematic presentation, the willingness to tackle serious themes including death and identity crisis, all of these became standards that later games would emulate or deliberately subvert. Final Fantasy VII's success demonstrated that console RPGs could achieve mainstream popularity beyond niche audience, opening doors for a genre that had previously been considered too complex or slow-paced for mass market appeal. The expanded universe, including films, novels, and additional games, explores corners of the story and characters that the original left unexamined. Crisis Core tells Zack's story, leading up to events of the main game, providing context for his relationship with Cloud and making his death more immediately impactful. Advent Children depicts events 2 years after Meteor's destruction, showing how survivors struggle with trauma and guilt while facing new threats. Dirge of Cerberus focuses on Vincent's past and his connection to Shinra's experiments. These expansions deepen understanding of the world, while not being necessary for appreciating the original's complete narrative. The remake project, begun decades after the original's release, reconstructs the story with modern technology, while expanding and elaborating on elements that were constrained by original hardware limitations. The decision to split the remake into multiple games allows for deeper exploration of Midgar and its inhabitants, transforming what was originally 6 to 8 hours of content into a full game experience. Changes to plot elements and addition of new story threads suggest the remake will diverge from the original in significant ways, creating conversation about faithful adaptation versus creative reinterpretation. The legacy of Final Fantasy VII extends beyond its direct influence on game design to its cultural impact as artifact that defined a moment in gaming history. For many players, it was their first experience with Japanese RPGs, or with narrative-driven games that treated storytelling as equal to, or more important, than gameplay mechanics. The PlayStation's CD-ROM format allowed for presentation values that previous cartridge-based systems could not match, making Final Fantasy VII showcase for what new hardware generation could achieve. The game's commercial success, selling over 11 million copies worldwide and becoming one of the best-selling games on the PlayStation, proved that Japanese RPGs could find audience outside Japan when given proper localization and marketing. It opened Western markets to genre that had previously been largely ignored or dismissed, creating opportunities for other franchises to achieve international recognition. The iconic status of characters like Cloud, Sephiroth, and Aerith transcended gaming to become part of broader pop culture awareness. Critical reception, while overwhelmingly positive, noted the game's ambitions sometimes exceeded its execution, with translation issues, occasional pacing problems, and a minigame proliferation that could distract from narrative momentum. The Chocobo breeding system, while beloved by many players, requires extensive time investment that stops story progression completely. The snowboarding and submarine sections, while adding variety, have aged less well than the core combat and exploration. These imperfections do not fundamentally undermine the achievement, but remind that even landmark games are products of specific development contexts with real constraints and limitations. The philosophical questions raised by the game remain relevant beyond its specific narrative context. What constitutes authentic identity when memory is unreliable or manipulated? How do we balance economic development with environmental sustainability? Can individuals resist systematic injustice through direct action? Or does meaningful change require systemic transformation? What obligations do the powerful have to those they have harmed in pursuit of profit? These questions admit no simple answers, and the game wisely does not pretend to provide them. instead presenting scenarios that force engagement with complexity. The environmental message avoids simplistic condemnation of all technology or development, instead focusing on sustainability and respect for interconnected systems. The problem is not that humanity uses energy, but that Shinra extracts it faster than natural cycles can replenish it, treating the planet as infinite resource rather than finite system, requiring careful management. The distinction matters because it allows for vision of human flourishing that does not require rejecting all advancement, suggesting instead that different approaches to development could serve human needs without destroying the world that sustains them. The portrayal of corporate power and its relationship to government and society reflects cynicism born from observing real-world patterns of regulatory capture and political influence. Shinra does not need to formally conquer nations when it can make them dependent on Mako energy, controlling them through necessity rather than military force. The corporation shapes media narratives to cast itself as hero and opposition as terrorists, controlling information flow to maintain public support despite actions that would be condemned if widely understood. These tactics mirror real-world corporate behavior closely enough to make Shinra feel like exaggeration of existing problems rather than purely fantastical creation. The resistance represented by Avalanche raises questions about means and ends, about when violent opposition to unjust systems becomes justified and what costs are acceptable in pursuit of necessary change. The game does not uncritically endorse their methods, showing that reactor bombings kill workers who are themselves victims of economic coercion. People working for Shinra not because they support environmental destruction, but because they need to feed their families. The moral complexity of resistance against overwhelming power. The way fighting for just cause does not automatically make all actions taken in its name justified, adds depth that simple good versus evil framing would lack. The ending's ambiguity about humanity's ultimate fate respects audience intelligence by not insisting on single interpretation. Some viewers see hope in Red 13's survival and the planet's healing, suggesting humanity learned and adapted to live sustainably. Others see the empty ruins and absence of visible humans as suggesting extinction or near extinction, a warning about consequences of failing to change destructive patterns. Both readings are supported by what is shown, and the refusal to definitively resolve the question allows the ending to function as Rorschach test revealing viewers' own hopes or fears about humanity's capacity for change. The journey from Midgar's slums to the northern crater, from small-scale resistance to world-spanning quest, transforms the protagonist and audience understanding of what is at stake. What begins as personal story about individuals opposing local injustice expands to reveal planetary-scale systems and threats that dwarf anything visible from ground level. The revelation of larger context does not invalidate the personal struggles, but rather shows how individual experiences connect to systemic patterns, how personal trauma and planetary crisis are linked through common roots in exploitation and disregard for consequences. The relationship between Cloud and Tifa, developed through shared history and mutual support through crisis, provides emotional anchor throughout the chaos. They knew each other as children, were separated by Cloud's failed ambitions and Nibelheim's destruction, and reconnected by chance when Cloud fell through Aerith's church roof. Their bond survives the revelation that much of what Cloud believed about their shared past was false, because the fundamental truth of their connection persists beneath the errors in specific memories. They matter to each other regardless of whether Cloud was really a soldier or merely a soldier, whether his memories are accurate or reconstructed. The chosen family formed by the party members demonstrates that bonds forged through shared struggle and choice can be as strong as biological relationships or childhood connections. They come from different backgrounds, different species in some cases, united by common opposition to Shinra and shared trauma from the journey. By the end, they trust each other with their lives, understand each other's pain and motivations, support each other through their individual crises. The family they choose and build together provides strength that none of them could access alone. The game's treatment of death acknowledges its permanence while suggesting that influence and memory transcend individual mortality. Aerith dies, but her consciousness persists in the lifestream, guiding its defense against Meteor. Zack dies, but his memories and personality fragments shape Cloud's constructed identity, his influence continuing through the person he saved. The countless casualties of Shinra's exploitation, from Corel to Sector 7 to everywhere the corporation extracted Mako without regard for cost, are not forgotten but memorialized through the survivors' determination to prevent similar tragedies. This conception of death as transition rather than absolute ending connects to the game's spiritual and environmental themes, suggesting consciousness returns to the planetary cycle, while influence continues through those who remain. It avoids both nihilistic meaninglessness and simplistic promises of resurrection, instead offering a middle position where death matters and has consequences, but does not mean someone's existence becomes irrelevant to ongoing events. The technical achievements of the game, from its 3-disc scope to its pre-rendered backgrounds to its full motion, video cutscenes, pushed the PlayStation hardware to its limits and demonstrated what careful optimization and artistic direction could achieve within constraints. The decision to use pre-rendered backgrounds rather than fully three-dimensional environments allowed for visual detail and atmospheric depth that real-time rendering could not match with available technology. The trade-off, fixed camera angles and occasionally unclear navigation, was accepted as worthwhile cost for the benefit of detailed painterly environments. The character model's blocky simplicity during regular gameplay, jarring when compared to their cutscene appearances, becomes barely noticeable once players adjust to the visual language. The expressive animations and distinctive designs convey personality despite technical limitations, showing how strong art direction can overcome hardware constraints. Cloud's spiky hair and enormous sword create instantly recognizable silhouette. Aerith's pink dress and ribbon make her immediately identifiable. Sephiroth's long silver hair and Masamune blade establish his visual distinctiveness without requiring detailed modeling. The progression system, allowing characters to be customized extensively through materia loadouts while maintaining baseline distinctions in their statistics and limit breaks, creates balance between flexibility and identity. Players can build characters towards similar capabilities through careful materia selection, or emphasize their innate differences by enhancing what makes each unique. The system rewards experimentation, while not punishing players who simply equip what seems useful without deep optimization. The weapon upgrade system, where each character has series of progressively more powerful weapons with different numbers of materia slots and growth multipliers, creates meaningful choices about equipment. The best statistically weapon may not be optimal if its materia configuration does not support preferred playstyle, forcing consideration of trade-offs between raw power and flexibility. Ultimate weapons for each character, hidden and requiring specific conditions or challenges to obtain, reward exploration and mastery while not being necessary for completing main story. The enemy skill materia, allowing characters to learn abilities from monsters who use them in battle, encourages experimentation and attention to opponent capabilities beyond simply defeating them. The system rewards curiosity about what different enemies can do and creates incentive to allow monsters to demonstrate their abilities before finishing fights. Some enemy skills become core components of optimized strategies, while others are novelties rarely used but interesting to collect. The Gold Saucer minigames, while distracting from main narrative, provide relief from constant tension and create spaces for character interaction in contexts other than combat or crisis discussion. The date sequence, the battle arena, the chocobo, racing, all of these offer variety and pacing contrast that prevent the dark story from becoming overwhelming. The optional nature means players uninterested in diversions can skip them without missing crucial content. Yet for those who explore them, these moments add texture and humanity to a world otherwise defined by tragedy. Each side activity becomes a breath between storms, a reminder that even in a dying world, people still find ways to laugh, compete, and dream. The Gold Saucer's carnival lights shine against the shadow of Shinra's oppression, its artificial joy carrying a kind of poignancy. Beneath the glitter lies escapism, but also resilience, the ability to create light in a place where darkness feels inevitable. It's in these small respites that Final Fantasy VII finds emotional rhythm, alternating between chaos and calm, grandeur and intimacy. This balance defines the entire experience. Final Fantasy VII constantly shifts between epic and personal, mythic and mechanical, finding beauty in contradiction. It tells a story about saving the planet, but grounds that mission in deeply human emotions: guilt, grief, and the search for belonging. Its environmental message is not abstract moralizing, but something that bleeds through every aspect of its world. The hum of Mako reactors, the smog-choked skies of Midgar, the eerie luminescence of the lifestream. Shinra's exploitation of life energy mirrors our own industrial world, and that parallel, subtle but unmistakable, gives the story its timeless relevance. Cloud's journey is the emotional core. What begins as the tale of a detached mercenary gradually becomes an exploration of identity itself. The revelation that his memories are fractured and partly fabricated forces both player and character to confront what makes a self real. Is it memory, experience, or the choices we make when everything else falls apart? Through Cloud's breakdown and reconstruction, the game articulates something rare in its medium: the idea that healing begins with honesty, that the acceptance of one's brokenness is not weakness but rebirth. His final confrontation with Sephiroth is as much an internal battle for authenticity as it is a clash between hero and villain. Sephiroth, in turn, represents what happens when knowledge is severed from empathy. He learns the truth of his creation and decides that if he was born of the planet's wound, then he will become its god. His arrogance mirrors Shinra's, a smaller reflection of the same desire to control what should only be understood. Where Cloud struggles to become whole, Sephiroth chooses to transcend humanity entirely, and that choice, his rejection of weakness, love, and mortality, turns him into the very monster he despises. The two men are mirrors, one trying to remember what it means to be human, the other trying to erase it. Aerith stands as their opposite, embodying the quiet strength of acceptance. Her serenity is not naivety, but wisdom born of listening to people, to pain, to the planet itself. When she dies, the story loses its heart by design. Her absence transforms the player's motivation from victory to preservation, from fighting evil to honoring love and loss. Her death lingers not just because it is unexpected, but because it feels like the soul of the world has been silenced. And yet, through the livestream's final surge, she speaks one last time, proving that compassion leaves echoes even when the body is gone. Technically and artistically, Final Fantasy VII was revolutionary. Its cinematic direction, layered score, and blend of science fiction and spirituality elevated the storytelling potential of games. Nobuo Uematsu's music turns emotional subtext into melody. Aerith's theme capturing innocence and impermanence, one-winged angel fusing choral grandeur with madness. Each track reinforces the narrative's emotional gravity, while pre-rendered backdrops and cinematic angles gave a sense of scope that no RPG before had achieved. The game became a bridge between the pixelated past and the modern age of cinematic storytelling. Yet beyond its innovations, what endures is its emotional sincerity. Every mechanic, every theme, every visual design choice supports the same idea, that life is fragile, interconnected, and worth protecting. The final image of the planet reclaiming itself, livestream and wholly intertwining to dissolve meteor, is both literal salvation and spiritual metaphor. Nature heals when humanity learns humility. The livestream's light becomes the planet's breath, and through it, the lingering spirit of Aerith reminds us that kindness too is a form of resistance. Final Fantasy VII is not just about saving the world. It is about understanding why the world matters in the first place. Its fusion of environmental warning, psychological introspection, and mythic grandeur gave the medium new language to express the human condition. In the end, the story endures not because of its spectacle, but because of its empathy. It reminds us that even amidst ruin and loss, connection remains the one unbreakable force, that to fight for the planet is to fight for the small, fleeting moments of light that make being alive